welcome to the MetaMask Developer Community Call. Vandan, if you could pull up the slide, be awesome. Meanwhile, as a quick intro, here, great to have you all with us. I am Manbir, a global community lead at Consensus. If this is not your first time here, you might have seen me on some of the MetaMask Snaps community calls earlier, but this one is quite different. This is the very first MetaMask API developer community call talking about a new MetaMask improvement proposal process that we're rolling out in order to provide more transparency on planned API changes and to invite developers as awesome proposals as well. So quickly walking through the agenda, if you could pull up the slide deck, Vandan.
Oh, are you not seeing it?
Not yet.
Okay, let me.
I see it.
Yeah, we all see it.
Oh, okay.
Oh, you are saying it. That's cool. I do not see it, but that's fine. If you could pull up the agenda, that would be great.
Sure, I'm on the agenda.
Awesome. Great. So quickly walking you all through the agenda. And welcome that we'll be going through, followed by a purpose and process overview that will then will followed by a planned APIs. Then we'll walk you through, and then we'll be talking about MIP1 that Alex will walk you through, followed by a Q&A and a closing. That some of our amazing guests we have today. So I'll quickly hand it over to. Would you like to go first?
Sure, yes. So I'm the product lead for MetaMask's developer experience team, which kind of encompasses our MetaMask API that most apps are integrated into, as well as our documentation and tooling around all of that as well. And with that, I'll let the rest of the team go. Alex?
Hey, yeah, I'm Alex. I am an engineer on the DApp API DevX team over here at MetaMask, and I will be presenting shortly about our first MIP. We'll get into the framework, and then this first one that we have worked on as a sort of testing ground and an example and a template that can be used going forward. I can kick it over to Zach.
Yeah, I'm Zach. I also work on the DevX team. I started at MetaMask about a year ago. I co-founded OpenRPC, and excited to be working on innovating in the open with the MIPs.
Awesome. If you all could also turn on your cameras just for a short while and say hi. Not super necessary, but that would be very awesome. Ayla, would you like to go next, or someone else? Whoever would like to take it.
Sure, I can go next. I'm Shane. I've been working at MetaMask for about 2 years. First year on Snaps, and then now I'm on the DevX team. And I used to work on other things in the Ethereum ecosystem, like Ethereum Classic, and also co-founded OpenRPC. And just excited to see the MIP process in the open now.
And Jesse?
Hello, I'm Jesse. Relatively new to the DevX team, but not super new to the space. And I'm excited to see what comes out of this call.
And Eric?
Yeah, my name is Eric. I'm the MetaMask DevRel manager, but you can also find me working on the MetaMask SDK and working with the MetaMask API team. I've been here for a little bit over a year, and I'm also excited about the MetaMask improvement process. So very happy to get this going on our first call.
Awesome. Well, without further ado, let's dive into what this is all about. So Yeah, the focus for today will be talking about a process we're calling our MetaMask Improvement Proposals. And it kind of takes inspiration from Ethereum Improvement Proposals, if you've heard of those and been involved with them. Also a little bit of like the React RFC process. So like when you have a product and you're looking for comment on changes. And the goals with all this new MetaMask Improvement Proposal process is to provide developers with early visibility to any changes that we have planned on the APIs. And then it's also meant to be a medium for getting community feedback from developers who are building on these APIs or maybe affected by the APIs or the changes that we have planned. And then finally, we also want to provide a path for the amazing developer community we have to propose their own API changes. We recognize that we're not always aware of all the different use cases and ideas out there, and there's a lot of innovation happening in the space. So we want to kind of encourage that. And yes, we call these MEEPs. So we might mention that occasionally with the acronym, just for short, as we go through this. So when would you kind of follow this MEEP process? When there's I think a couple of scenarios. One is there are things that are simple. If there's like bug fixes or just documentation improvements, those don't need to go through this full API kind of change process. And then we also there's a sort of deeper topic that I think Manbir can maybe touch on later on. But we are building something called MetaMask Snaps that allows developers also to extend our APIs in a more permissionless way. But that's still in developer preview and may have some like limitations to it. So if your needs are not met by that, by MetaMask Snaps, then this is the process you want to go through to get an API change through. And the key thing to understand here is that MetaMask APIs, they are available to all dApps and affect all dApps, and they also affect all MetaMask users. So with that great power comes some high responsibility. So we've created this group of API maintainers. Most of the folks on this call are considered API maintainers, and they are responsible for stewardship over any major changes to the APIs. And the reason why we need some governance over those APIs is because there are often trade-offs between like developer preferences versus end user. What's straightforward for the end users. Also considerations around privacy and security. And we think about that in a pretty long-term way as well. So that's why it's important to have kind of a group thinking about all of those constraints. And then we're also, there is a need to align improvements with our like long-term direction of MetaMask, so we don't end up with kind of like a product with a bunch of features that are going in different directions. And finally, I think one thing that's been really powerful for MetaMask in terms of our success is just that we have really tried to avoid making disruptive breaking changes. And if we did have changes like that, we've done a lot of communication and sort of like eased the whole developer community into them. So that's something that this group will also be kind of trying to ensure that we avoid anything that's too disruptive if we don't have to. Then there's these changes to the APIs can come from two primary sources. One is this group of API maintainers. They have their ideas on how we can improve the product and are pretty steeped in the space. And then you also have what we consider the community, and that is pretty broad. It could include teams within Consensus or MetaMask that are interested in making changes that are not part of this API maintainer group. And may not be aware of all the sort of intricacies and trade-offs involved in making an API change. And then it can also be external developers. If you're building a dApp, then essentially, can submit in changes from there as well. So that's essentially the broad public. And then a quick view of the life cycle. This is kind of a simplified version, but essentially we have these proposals that can come in from the community or API maintainers. Generally, the process is pretty similar for regardless of where it came from. The one difference is that when the proposal comes from the API maintainers, because they're so steeped in the space, there may be a fair amount of discussion internally and design considerations that go into even a draft. Versus we recognize for the community, you may need to create a draft that's maybe doesn't have everything considered up front. It can be pretty rough draft, and then we'll help you kind of get to the point where it's ready for review and can go further down the process. So once we do have a proposal, when it's ready for review by the API maintainers, you can essentially request to have that moved into review. And then that'll be reviewed by the API maintainers. There may be feedback to improve the proposal or consider some factors that may not have been top of mind up front. And then once there's a level of stability that's been achieved there, it will be promoted to last call, which is really a signal for the rest of the community that we're sort of planning to potentially accept a proposal, and it's time to kind of pay attention and provide any final feedback or ideas before it's moved to accepted. And then once it's accepted, then we essentially have that in our queue for implementation, and eventually, once it's out in the wild, then it's considered implemented. And yeah, there are some stages that we are also elaborating on when we're talking about implementation. Implementation, by the way, primarily the API maintainers, they also have a day job, which is building behind these APIs, actually implementing them. So they'll be implementing a lot of these, but there's nothing that says that someone else can't also be a contributor. Most of our code base is pretty open, so that's also another path. So, but you don't have to implement if you're proposing. The API maintainers can be expected to implement as well. So when we do implement, there's really a couple of stability levels that we're putting on the APIs. The first will be when it's experimental. So we would essentially push it out in MetaMask, but label it as experimental and maybe have some kind of warnings around it. We don't recommend most developers start adopting at that stage, just the developers who are kind of committed to testing it out in the wild. And then once we have some feedback there, we might need to make some minor adjustments to the API. But then once we have enough adoption and it's achieved a level of stability, then we'll promote that to be stable, which basically means that we're encouraging other developers to adopt it, and they can expect the API not to change on them. And then finally, there's also kind of the end of the life cycle. If there's an API that needs to be deprecated, then that will go to stability level 0, which basically says we recommend that you do not build using these APIs that are deprecated. So yeah, let's kind of talk about a couple of planned API changes. The first one has been submitted as like a formal MetaMask Improvement Proposal. We used this one, as Alex mentioned, to kind of test the process out on ourselves a little bit, so we could understand how it might need to evolve and be adapted. And that one is about extending the wallet watch asset method for NFTs. I won't steal Alex's thunder beyond that. And then we have another change to introduce a method called wallet revoke permissions. So right now you can get permissions and you can request permissions, but you can't kind of like clear the DApp can't ask MetaMask to kind of clear the permissions associated with that DApp. And Ala can talk a little bit about the reasoning for that change. Ala, by the way, is in our portfolio team, and so he's not an API maintainer, but he's kind of within the MetaMask group and kind of contributing as a community member there. And then we also want to highlight the fact that we are looking at evolving MetaMask to support multi-chain APIs, which are being standardized through a standards body called Chain Agnostic Standards Alliance. There's two kind of proposals. They have their own standard system as well called CAPES. And so there's CAPE 27 and 25, which we're still kind of collaborating on and evaluating, but that's on the horizon. So we wanted to at least touch on that here. We won't go into too many details on it, but it is in our plan to start building towards like a multi-chain future through the APIs. And with that, I will hand it over to Alex to talk a little bit more about MetaMask Improvement Proposal number 1.
Thanks, London. Yeah. Oh, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Yeah, so maybe you can kick it to the next slide. Yeah, so as I said before, we kind of wanted to get the ball rolling with the MIPs, MIPs, and just start the process of sort of using internal contributions, whether it's directly from the API maintainers team or, as London said, from Ala over on the portfolio team, and give folks who want to contribute externally some sort of template or example of like what we expect. And so yeah, so we took the opportunity to introduce a change that we've meant to and sort of intended to do for some time now, which is to extend the wallet watch asset API, which was introduced in EIP 747, and make it support NFTs, or specifically like ERC 721 and ERC 1155 token standards. The original API did leave that door open, but those standards were 721 was only slightly before 747, so it wasn't a very robust and widely used standard at the time. It wasn't totally clear, which standards we were gonna want to support with this, and how we would want to modify the API accordingly. And so we've introduced some sort of small non-breaking changes to match those APIs, or rather to match those token standards, and give us the opportunity to start to provide a better NFT experience within MetaMask. As some of you may know, we recently, within the extension, started supporting NFTs, which we've long done on the mobile application, but recently we've added support so that you can view, add your NFTs to the wallet. And that has mainly occurred for most users probably on Ethereum mainnet. And that's, well, before I go into that, let me just speak to this chart since we have it pulled up. Yeah, we just want to acknowledge, I think, that NFTs have obviously become a massive part of what is driving the ecosystem right now. You can see here that, we obviously had sort of that DeFi summer wave, and for a while NFTs clearly, in this chart virtually represented almost nothing in terms of the metrics that we see in terms of usage of our wallet. And we just want to, acknowledge and begin to work more towards better integrating the expectations of users who want to use MetaMask for buying, showing, and whatever else they may, gaming with NFTs. And so this is one sort of piece of that puzzle. So if you want to maybe click it to the next. Yeah. So I was starting to say this just before that, so we do support this auto detection feature on in MetaMask, which is using the OpenSea's indexing API. Eventually, we would like to expand that to use a wider array of NFT data providers. But for the meantime, we are using OpenSea, and some folks may not want to either be exposing their IP to their IP address, that is, to when making queries to the OpenSea API, which is a required piece of what goes into the auto detection feature. And furthermore, up until recently, OpenSea has only supported auto detection, or rather, their API has only supported Ethereum mainnet. Eventually, we will be integrating some other chains that they have since included in their API offerings. But for the time being, this addition of the Wallet Watch asset support for NFTs will enable us to provide a better, process of adding your NFTs into your wallet on chains that are not Ethereum mainnet. Even if you wish to opt into using OpenSea's API and using our auto detection feature, that isn't currently available on any other EVM chain that is not Ethereum mainnet. And so, yeah, so the goal here was basically to provide that the coverage in those gaps, and also to provide sort of a less third-party kind of involved experience for the users who want a more seamless integration of their NFTs in their wallet, but not introducing third-party querying, network requests, and so on and so forth. Yeah, we can maybe read through. Yeah, so this kind of speaks to everything I've been saying here. We had to make, maybe if you go to the next slide, we had to just make, just a small non-breaking change to the API to support, to make extend this support. So now, previously, this, within the params of the method itself, only really ERC20 was supported. Of course, you could pass these other types. You could pass any string really, but it was not gonna. It was not actually supported. There was no there's no support for it. But the API, the specification itself, left this door open. Previously, so the options bucket, this options object that was part of the params, it had address, symbol, name, and image, and so the address is always a required parameter, and for obvious reasons, we couldn't add the token to your wallet if we didn't know the contract address, and then the symbol and name and image were kind of additional metadata that you could add if you want, well, as a dApp developer, if you wanted to provide that metadata as part of the call, they didn't do any sort of validation of that metadata, and we intend to add that as part of sort of refining this API more generally. But the piece that we've added as part of MIP1 is adding this optional token ID option parameter. It's optional in the sense that in the broader API, but I guess you would say probably that it's required for when type is ERC 721 or ERC 1155. So we use the address and the token ID. These two are required when ERC 721 or ERC 1155. Address is required for all three of these, and then the symbol, image, and name are optional when using ERC20s. Going forward, I would ask, if that maybe a bit of a rambly explanation, but that can be, further explained if you reference our docs, which I'm sure we'll link out here. But so basically, we no longer, in the case of NFTs, we're no longer requesting or providing the option for dApps to include metadata as part of the request. Rather, we simply ask for the address and the token ID, and then we go directly to the chain, or if the user has OpenSea enabled, we will use OpenSea metadata as well to gather the metadata, the relevant metadata, so the image associated with the NFT, the name of the NFT, whatever else we intend to add to our state. So it's a very simple API, basically for these NFT requests. It would simply be an address and the token ID, and from there we do all of the fetching and gathering of the metadata and adding those to state. I don't know if we've included like a picture of what this will be, what this is intended to look like, but we shortly enough, and within the MIP repo, we will include images of that, of like what we want this to look like, so that we can kind of get discussion on what the UX itself looks like as well. It's fairly straightforward change, not too much to dig into there, but we do welcome feedback. This whole process is about doing this in public, and getting feedback on the API itself, getting feedback on the UX concerns for people out there who want to leverage this API. And yeah, so we'll certainly want to point everyone to the repo itself, where this MIP lives, and where those discussions should be had. I believe that kind of sums up, and the MIP itself has a lot more, goes into some more depth about, the motivations, the specification itself, and any kind of security caveats that we, want to address, and when we actually go about and implementing this. And yeah, and then in QA here, we'll also invite people to offer any feedback on this. But I think that sums up what I was going to say about this particular MIP. Fundin, I don't know if you want to take it back over, and if we wanted to.
Yeah, I think I wanted to check in with Ala if there's anything he wanted to touch on with wallet revoke permissions. I know that's kind of in the hopper as well.
Yeah, definitely. I can give a quick overview about it. We to include like the technical details or the MIP for this method, but I could just give a quick overview about this method, what is the mandate, and what was the incentive to develop it. So basically, it's wallet revoke just a complementary to the existing two methods we have, which is wallet get permissions and wallet request permissions as part of the MetaMask general purpose permissioning system. So if you are EIP 2255, where we have introduced wallet get permissions and wallet request permissions, but we don't have an interface for dApps developers and users to revoke or disconnect the wallet. So if you want to using any dApp today, if your wallet, your permission will still be there. So if you just refresh and if you just refresh the dApp, you will still be seeing the connection there. The only way for you to disconnect a wallet is to go to the wallet extension directly and disconnect address. So there are two problems here. It's like the first one, we don't have an approach in order to delete for a group of addresses connected to the same origin. So let's say you are connected from like xyz.com. You are authenticating or allowing permission for account A, B, and C. We don't have a mechanism today if you want just to all addresses A, B, and C if they are already connected. If you want to do it through the MetaMask extension, you need to go one and disconnect. Or maybe you will need to delete, the site directly. What this method, wallet revoke permission, is going to do, it's going to give you versatile in order to disconnect, like revoke all permissions, which basically going to say revoke all the permissions for this website, regardless of which account is connected. So if you are connected to 10 account addresses, all permissions will be revoked. And this is great for security. People like concerned, about their security overall. But also we have an option if you want to revoke permissions and delete connections for a specific address. So it's like you say, I will revoke permission for account address A, but I would like to keep account address B and C. And we are working to provide a different mechanisms in order to revoke the permissions, either providing certain set of parameters, or by providing the permission object ID. I hope for the next call we would be able to have more granularity and share more implementation details with you. But in like this is just a quick summary over purpose of wallet revoke permission. Happy to take if there's any question about it.
Thank you, Ala. Yeah, I think that's the step that we're at now. So yeah, Minbir, is there? Can we switch to Q&A?
Sure. So I do see some questions by if the type is set to ERC 721 or ERC 1155, the call to this method will require the token ID option. Is that
Yeah.
the case?
So I'm just wondering if the way that the Wallet Watch asset works, before, whenever we called Wallet Watch asset, it was just around ERC 20 tokens, not NFTs. And so now we have, I guess, if we set that type to anything but an ERC 20, ERC 21, if we set to ERC 721 or ERC 1155, that token ID is now a required parameter and it will fail or error if we don't add it. Is that how it works?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, so we can't, the way that those standards work is you would need, so the other thing I should add about this is that we don't allow users to add NFTs to their wallet that they do not actually own. that would sort of provide a different functionality than what the wallet currently does, and sort of watching an asset. I know watch asset kind of suggests that's what we would do, but currently the wallet is not configured in such a way that we you say watch assets that are owned by other wallets, right?
Sure. Like you can do with yours.
Sorry, can you say that again?
Like you can do with a regular token, right? I can. It's different in that. So, is there a check going on to make sure that I own that NFT?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. So if you don't own it, we in the proposal we would be throwing an error, and if you don't have a token ID, because again those standards ERC 1155 and ERC 721, they are non-fungible, or rather, they are non-fungible, and so those token IDs are helping us to identify a specific token on that contract. And so if you just provide the contract address, we wouldn't be able to, say much of anything about whether you own it or which specific asset on the contract that you're even interested in, right? And so we'll throw an error if that token ID is not present.
Cool. And then I did have go ahead.
Sorry, I think also it makes sense from a usability perspective if you think about it, to avoid polluting your portfolio. So imagine you will be able to do that and add the NFTs for other holders and other users. It will just be polluting your portfolio. I think from usability and user experience perspective, like even if it's technically possible, business requirements and usability makes a lot of sense.
Absolutely.
Yeah, we don't want to introduce confusion on that front. But I think when we looked at the API, we did think about the fact that the API could allow for that in the future. So ideally the API wouldn't have to change. It's more just like the MetaMask side behaviors that we would adjust, if we decided to implement something that maybe we had a holding area, okay, these are not your owned assets, but they're just watched, and we were very clear about that, then we could potentially do something like that in the future.
And then also those are chain specific. So obviously if I own an NFT on Ethereum versus Polygon versus Linea, whatever, as I switch my chain, I would, I guess they would not show up anymore as well. I'm just trying to think of all the questions that someone would ask.
Eric, that's actually a good point to maybe for everybody, is that there is still some coordination needed for calling watch asset for these NFTs, and kind of making sure it's aligned with the chain that MetaMask is on. Because if it doesn't match, then we'll look it up on the wrong chain, essentially.
So if I'm a dApp developer and I am I have a minting page, right? And they mint a ticket to my event or something, and they have to be on, let's say Linea chain in order to mint that NFT. Then I also want to be doing a check as a developer to make sure that when if I'm calling watch asset to add that NFT to their wallet, that they're also on the correct chain when I'm calling that method as well.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, so it's the same as as the method exists with ERC20 tokens, except for actually the idea would be we would be adding validation so that we would check in a way, we would throw an error if you attempt to add an NFT on the wrong chain. We will throw an error if we try to call to that contract and either the contract doesn't exist or it's not actually an NFT. Maybe there is something deployed there, or maybe it's just an EOA. But in any case, if we'll do some validation to make sure that it is in fact an NFT project, like an NFT, right, that matches the standard that you provided, and then throw an error if it's not. So it forecloses some of the chance that would erroneously get added on the wrong chain. But yes, but currently, for instance, people who implement wallet watch asset or dApps that implement wallet watch asset, generally do a check that you are on the right chain before.
I'm sure that also kind of, when you're talking about doing validation for this, I mean, that also kind of makes it kind of hard. I mean, it's kind of a challenging thing for us to be able to get that validation correct, to make sure that, you know, their error, we're not giving them an error that says that they don't own this NFT or that it's not on the right chain, just because they're on the wrong chain. Like we some of that validation needs to take into consideration, you know, those different things. And so that's kind of the challenging part to doing this additional validation, I would assume, is to make sure that if they're not on the right chain, but they do on the NFT on another chain, that we're kind of giving them the right error so that they can kind of figure out what's going on, and vice versa, I would assume.
Yeah, absolutely. I think the validation portion of it is the most complex portion of what the API change itself, but getting getting the communication of what has occurred correctly, such that developers sort of can understand what may have gone wrong, is probably the most complex piece of this change. And we'll definitely want any feedback, now and when we put this into experimental, about how that's feeling on the dApp developer side of things.
And
yeah, and then
just to chime in, just to chime in with a question, what's the best way to provide feedback? Is there a way anyone who's working on good, maybe any other platform to provide feedback?
Yeah, I don't know if we can share it somehow within maybe in the chat. There's a MetaMask Improvement Proposals repo that's in the MetaMask org. Maybe someone, Vanda, maybe you can share.
Yeah, I just posted the link. Yep.
Okay, awesome. And so then, yeah, there's a folder within that repo that contains currently just MIP1. And that would be, and so then, yeah, either directly as comments there, and then we've enabled the discussions tab is where we would generally push people to sort of discuss the specifics of these concerns or any feedback or any concerns about the implementation or about the specification.
So a few questions around that. As a developer who's looking to contribute, when I'm creating an MIP and I'm viewing this, MetaMask Improvement Proposals GitHub repo, I'm creating issues first that then turn into pull requests. Discussions can be had around those. How does that work? And I have a few follow-up questions.
Yeah, I mean, I think we would generally encourage people to raise discussions to sort of get some, I think, validation from others about whether they want to propose like a change to an existing MIP. Now, if you wanted to create a wholly new MIP, there's a lot of information in that repo. There's a contributing markdown file. There's a template markdown file. There's a process guide. So there's a lot of sort of material there to get more information and just asynchronously understanding how to go about that. And then of course you can reference this first MIP for sort of like an example of the sort of what we're looking for. And then from there, like certainly feel free to open. We would encourage people to be opening these PRs, following that template to add MIPs. But yeah, like we as the MIP maintainer group will, be filtering for serious contributions and also ones that either have indicated a willingness to actually implement on the like the proposer is either willing to implement or is something that we on our side are enthusiastic enough about, and you've done the work of getting us to the point of understanding the value such that we would take on that work, right? And so there's a kind of a negotiation with any open source work of like who's going to actually go out and do this thing, right? And we want to keep that process open, and we're open to feedback on how the process is seeming and how it's going in terms of
So the discussions is kind of a good like sounding board area for your ideas, and then depending on whether the feedback that you get, or maybe at some point in time we've got a lot of different MIPs, and one of them is already being worked on, or this idea you have is already being worked on. That kind of stuff can be discussed, and then it potentially turns into an issue or a pull request after that point. Is that kind of the flow, or how it might work if I'm someone proposing something?
Yeah. I don't know if someone else is coming in there, but yeah, I would say if you're proposing something completely new, oh, Eric, you're muted. I don't know if you were saying something.
Oh no, I was actually looking at the contribution. So it looks like it's a new branch. So they fork the MIP repository, they create a new branch, they prepare the proposal, and then you add your proposal to.
Yes.
Got it. Okay. Now that answers my question.
Okay.
As an MIP proposer, once one of these MIPs is kind of, before it's in the experimental, before this gets put out into MetaMask as experimental, and you're an MIP proposer, I'm assuming that the way that you test that is just by kind of building that branch that MIP is on, and anyone could then go and build that branch locally, and then kind of add it to Chrome, add that MetaMask kind of version to Chrome and kind of test it out. How does that work?
Oh yeah, maybe I can speak to that a little bit. So the MIPs they're just kind of the shape of the API, right? It's really just describing that. It's not necessarily providing the implementation there. There may be references to kind of implementation considerations. So there may be a little bit of coverage there, but it doesn't necessarily like have all the
MIP is going to eventually turn into a branch inside of MetaMask that's going to get worked on in the extension, where that's the thing that if you actually wanted to kind of test that feature out, you would need to, you wouldn't be doing anything with the actual MIP repo, you'd be doing it with the MetaMask extensions repo.
Yeah, and I think the idea for us is that we would push it to a public build, for developers to test out, and that's why we have this experimental stability index, right? We're saying it's still considered experimental. It's available in public, but only developers who are really kind of ready to experiment with it should be using it. And then once we get feedback, then we'll kind of promote that. So not a lot of they don't have to be able to build our extension and all that good stuff necessarily. If they're interested in it, they can do that and sort of follow every step of the process. But we'll kind of use the implemented stage and the experimental label, so that'll be the first time that you kind of get access to a given API.
Cool. That makes sense.
Yeah, thank you, Membir, for posting some of these links. I think those are essential. We have the repo. There's also a API specs GitHub repo and an API spec kind of just like I put it as latest. It's like the amalgamation of all of our latest, like all the API changes that we've made. And essentially, if you just want to know how does the MetaMask API work today across clients, like that API spec will tell you, and it uses OpenRPC to describe the API, so kind of gives you a very precise picture of the latest version. And as we get MIPs through and we implement them, that API, the MetaMask API specs will be updated as well, so you can sort of see that come through. And then we also even have like a API playground. So there's an interactive API reference the last link there. So when these are implemented, even if they're experimental, you could kind of go in and play around with the method, see how it works essentially. So that's kind of how we'll flow all this through the process.
I think the way I see this is like the primary role of is just to provide a shared frame of reference. It's like as a sort of specification blueprint for any method. Either it's like experimental, which would later on could be turned into stable. And this is going to act, in my opinion, like as a ultimate source of truth about the specification. But in terms of implementation, you would see to like it's not one-to-one, it would be one-to-many. It's like there will be API specs, there will be client implementation, and it could expand into other repository. But the main purpose of MIP is like locking the specification, alignment, get our community, and have like a sort of like visibility from the internal team overall.
Exactly. Speaking of which, one point, MIP1 is in last call right now. So we are looking for kind of final comments from the community. If anyone has any concerns or major requests there, please get them in quickly. Otherwise, we will be moving that to accepted soon. And then we'll work towards getting that implemented and out for developers to start experimenting with.
And the best way to kind of view that MIP1 is just to go to the MIP1 last call branch in the MetaMask Improvement Proposals repo and check out the README.
Yeah, that's the best starting point. It has all the kind of links to other. There's some other. There's a reference to an OpenRPC spec that has the watch asset portion of it. But that's the best kind of starting point.
Awesome. Cool. Really appreciate this conversation. I think it really makes it a lot more transparent in terms of building, and goes really well with the ethos of Ethereum and Web3 as a whole. I'm not sure if I completely missed it because I don't currently see your presentation, Vandan. I think there's some error on my side, but could you talk a little more about what a good first proposal looks like, or share maybe an example on GitHub?
Sure. Yeah. We'll go into this crazy view for a second. But yeah, I mean, this is Alex's MIP, and I think one thing I wanted to say before we go into this though is that for community members who are thinking about submitting an API proposal, we don't want them to be overwhelmed by all of this. Like it doesn't have to be perfect. You just do your best to get it started, and we'll guide you from there. So don't feel like you have to. This is the bar for the entry. This is like probably like the sort of best case scenario type of proposal. But yeah, it tells like there's a little portion here about like the motivation. Kind of makes the case for what why this is even important. We provide a usage example so you can sort of see how the developer would actually interact with this API, and then there's some more details around the proposal itself, and this is where I think we link out. Yeah, like so there's actually a detailed OpenRPC API specification, so you get a very precise picture of how that API would work and kind of like all the scenarios around it. If you go into that piece, and we do recommend that with an MIP, if you can, you could include a preliminary PR on the API spec repo. And we also have some other kind of key areas here around like gotchas and the developer adoption considerations, user experience. And this is where, again, like our team's very steeped in considering all these other factors. Not every developer is going to have that, but we can kind of guide any submissions to add in considerations that are important. And then, yeah, the other thing is we do want to get into the habit of getting a list of committed developers. I think, especially for implementation, if we're going to spend the time to build behind one of these API specifications, then we want to know that there's going to be developers on the other side of that who are willing to experiment with it and get it to stable and will really use it. So that's going to help guide us on the MIPS that should be prioritized, even if they are like accepted. And yeah, I guess there's like, we have this process guide, all the gory details. There's a template, and then there's like a little overview of like how to actually like start contributing.
Then we articulate to our community where exactly they could drop their feedback. For instance, on one of those branches.
Yeah, so like this one, MIP1, it basically, I think it has a recommendation for this one how we would want to do that. So like opening an issue in this repository. Alex, I don't know if you want to say more, but like if it's just like a general kind of question, or if it's MIP specific, you can start a discussion here, like, hey, I have a question about MIP1, here's some concerns I have or something, right? If you're trying to kind of get very specific about like some line in the MIP or whatnot, then it might be just easier to provide, put a PR on that, or post an issue.
Yeah, I agree.
Anything to add, Alexander, Jixi, Ayla, Shane, or Zach?
We're excited to start getting some feedback on this part of our process. We get tons of feedback with finished product. We get external contributor PRs, but not part of our planning, our API really.
Yeah, we hope it's a differentiator with MetaMask, because I think not all wallets do things this way, where they're this open about letting dApp builders like ask for changes to how a wallet works. So very excited to see how the community embraces this and how engaged they are as well. So again, yeah, looking forward to seeing engagement there, and yeah, don't feel like again, everything has to be perfect or you're asking a silly question. Like, feel free to just hop in and get going.
Absolutely, I think it makes MetaMask a more people's wallet and not certain individuals or an organization's wallet. So I think super exciting. Cool. That being said, I think we're well on time. I just wanted to quickly add, thank you all for joining. In case you would like to conversations, definitely feel free to hop on to the Consensus Discord. Vandan, if you could just pull up community.consensus.net, we'll be able to showcase some links over there. Yeah, community.consensus.net. So if you scroll down, you will see a bunch of links to our blog, our Discord, rest of our channels where we have hosted a bunch of resources for you all to check out. Definitely, you can go to the YouTube channel to find rest of our community calls as well. And Vandan, is there any tentative timeline on when the developers can expect the next community call? You're on mute.
But then you're muted.
Sorry, all these screens. Yeah, so I think we do want to make it more like a monthly session where we bring the community together, share updates on even if it's just progress on MIPS. Maybe it doesn't mean there has to be new MIPS in the queue. We also want to provide airtime for anyone who does have a MIP that they want to kind of build community support and interest around. So yeah, definitely want to have this as an ongoing kind of call with our developer audience.
Awesome. And if you just quickly scroll down one, then you'll also see a bunch of events that we plan to be at. So if you're going to be at ETHCC, we're hosting a bunch of events. We're hosting Build Up specifically for Not Another Virtual Hackathon that we just kicked off a few days back. We just had the kickoff call today itself. So it kicked off. It got announced a few days back. We just getting started. So definitely participate in that hackathon, and if you could build on top of MetaMask SDK or Snaps, definitely we would love to see that as well. We're hosting all these events, and definitely we're also going to be at ETH NYC and rest of the events that you can check out. But for now, this is pretty much it from our side. Thank you all for joining, and we hope to see you on our future community calls as well.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.